San Francisco. Professor Su practiced law from the firm of Fenwick and West in Palo Alto, California. He has a Bachelor of Science in Electrical Engineering from Columbia, a JD from Columbia, an MS in Ecology, a PhD in Agricultural and Resource Economics from the University of California, Davis. He's an author of A Case for a Carbon Tax. He's been affiliated with CCL for 3 years. And is here to speak to you today about carbon fee dividend. Please put your hands together for Dr. Shili Su.
Thanks so much for coming. I've been handing around, or I've asked, can you hear me? All right.
Adjust it up.
Thanks, hold it. Maybe I do have to hold it. Okay, so there's a handout going around. There may not be enough. I only made about 50 copies or so. I just printed them out so that I've got a lot of facts and figures and pie charts, so you may want to reference back to them at some point. That's why I copied them. If you don't have any interest, then feel free to pass it on. I didn't make that many copies because I didn't want to presume the Canadian after all. So, anyway, so let me kind of tell you about what I wanted this breakout session to accomplish. It was to identify some of the trade-offs with the option of doing fee and dividend. Where I come out now, I haven't always been this way, I feel like carbon fee and dividend is the best carbon tax policy. We're all carbon taxes, carbon fees. It's what we do with the money after we collect it that makes a big difference. And the dividend proposal, as you well know, is that we collect it all, we give the money all back in a lump sum distribution to all different households. There's a lot of things we can do with that money, and all I want to do is help you think about the trade-offs. There's no kind of hard and fast answer, there's no punchline at the end of it, but maybe at the end of it, if you can kind of talk about what to do with carbon tax or carbon fee revenues, then I will feel like I've done something useful. So, anyway, let me start with a question. The CCL proposal was a $15 a ton carbon fee, increasing gradually. And the first year, it'll raise about $80 to $100 billion, and it'll keep getting larger as the carbon fee goes up. Not linearly, because as the fee gets larger, emissions will go down, so we'll collect less. That's the way it's supposed to work. So, given that amount of money, what would you like to do? Would you rather give that money to rich people or poor people? I think that's a trick question, right?
We'll take the money.
We'll take the money? All right, if you're poor. Well, how many people think rich people?
Hey, just the same.
Just the same?
Equal.
Well, it is. But the point of this is that fee and dividend is not discriminating. There are a lot of things we can do with it. The right answer, if you want to be an economist, your mother's probably hoped for better for you than that. But anyway, the right answer for an economist is, well, it depends. I think we have a lot of values. I think part of what is important about us as kind of voters and policymakers is we value certain things. But in this narrow little sphere that I'm trying to share with you, it matters. It matters what happens to that money, what that money is going to do for you as a country, as an economy, and not just, you know, the values that we embed. So, you know, our options, we kind of know about. There's the CCL proposal where we dividend it, and there's a bunch of other things we can do. We could reduce personal income taxes. We could reduce capital gains taxes. We could try to reduce sales taxes. I'm not sure how we would do that at a federal level, but anyway, we could try. We could reduce payroll taxes, like Social Security taxes, Medicare, Medicaid taxes. We could reduce corporate income taxes. That usually is good for a couple of boos. Or we could keep the money. Well, what do you think is, should we just keep the money? We're paying down the debt. That's exactly right. Right? That's something worth doing in and of itself. There are different trade-offs with paying down the debt. So, anyway, what I like to do is to go through these different options and try and identify some of the advantages and disadvantages of it. How do we know what the economic impacts are of these different options? We mostly rely on economic models. There's a concurrent session going on right now for the REMI model that kind of offers CCL this real rigorous economic analysis of what happens if we do the carbon fee and dividend. And it's a pretty positive picture. And I'm going to rely on another model, not because in any way, shape, or form do I not believe in the REMI model. There's some different assumptions in that model that go into some of the models I'm going to reference. And they're just different assumptions at all. I think there's a bit of uncertainties of which assumption is more realistic, but one is either better or worse than the other. Anyway, the models that I have tried to keep on top of are generated mostly at Resources for the Future. There's a think tank of environmental economists just down the road a bit. And they've been doing this for a long time. This is a model led by a researcher named Jared Carbone, who's at the University of Calgary now. But they looked at what the impacts of a carbon tax would be on GDP. And what they did was they looked at, in the blue line, if you had a carbon tax instead of a capital gains tax, in the red line, if you had a carbon tax instead of a labor tax or personal income tax, in the green line, if you somehow could had a carbon tax instead of sales taxes, and then finally, this purple line at the bottom is the carbon fee and dividend option. I'll get into why that looks so bad in a moment, why I still believe in it, and why I still think it's the best option. But from the perspective of just pure economic modeling, if you could take your carbon tax revenues and use it to reduce capital gains taxes, and we all know that benefits the richest people, that's actually going to be the biggest bang for the buck economically. Right? This is, what that's showing us is that at first it's going to be a little bit costly to have a carbon tax, and over time, not only is it going to pay for itself, our economy is going to be better off than it would be without the carbon tax. Why is that? It's because capital gains taxes and a lot of these taxes that we levy on, let's just call them the 1%, are distortionary. They change the way that we invest money, okay? And so if we have a chance to levy a carbon tax, we'll reduce those distortionary taxes. What we believe is that the economy will grow faster, okay? All right, less so with an income tax. We think that personal income taxes are distortionary too. Even less so with sales taxes. The carbon fee and dividend proposal, for reasons that I'll get into a little bit, is actually turns out to be the least bad. So anyway, if you just look at this, if we took in revenues in the carbon tax, the best thing we could do from just a purely economic point of view is to reduce capital gains taxes. All right? So anyway, there are other options. We could also reduce corporate income taxes. Here's the problem with carbon taxes, right? If you look at the burden of a carbon tax, it's an energy tax. Is my voice kind of steady, or is it kind of up and down? Okay, steady. Okay, good. So here's the problem. If you just had a carbon tax without anything else, without even thinking about what to do with the revenues, you can see, if you look at those 5 quintiles by income, the richest, from the poorest to the richest, the lowest to the highest, it hits the poorest quintile of income earners the hardest. Almost 2% of their income is going to go into a higher energy tax, and by the time you get to the richest quintile, it's a relatively small one for them, almost certainly an insignificant figure. What these two authors, Donald Marin and Eric Toder, did was, let's look at the politics of it. We know that kind of there are going to be powerful lobbying forces, political forces that would favor reducing corporate income taxes. What would happen if we did that? If we took a carbon tax and we used it to reduce corporate income taxes, well, that looks even worse from our distributional perspective, right? Some of the money for corporate taxes would make the tax burden a little bit lower for the poorest quintile. But look at the richest quintile. They're much better off. That kind of dark blue line dipping below the zero line is the kind of reflection of the fact that their net tax burden is negative almost 1%. Okay, that's fine, but they recognize that this would be a tough sell politically, right? In any Congress, this would be a hard thing to sell. To tell people we should make the rich richer and the poor poorer. So what they propose is maybe we should reduce corporate income taxes, but give a tax credit, kind of like the earned income tax credit, to the poorest quintile. And so what does that do? That makes the poorest quintile at least better off. You know, that little tiny blue line going below the zero means that they have a net negative tax burden. The rich are still sitting pretty, about 0.5% better off. The middle class are getting hit a little bit less because of the tax credit. But what I wanted to kind of impress upon you is that this is kind of what economists do, right? They kind of look at the money, and with different modeling assumptions, they say, what do people do with it? And what they have decided, what this model seems to show for them, is that if you give the money back in the way that they propose, then people will spend the money in such a way that the middle class are going to be tough. They're going to be worse off than the poorest and the richest quintiles. And what it also does for us is help us identify that, you know, if we do this, these are the political benefits and disadvantages, and here are some of the economic advantages and disadvantages. So, you know, not a clear picture by any sense of by any stretch of the imagination, but it does tell us something, I think. Anyway, by the way, so why is the corporate income tax distortionary? We do have the highest statutory corporate tax rates in the developed world in the United States. We have a lot of perks in the Internal Revenue Code that give various corporations a lot of benefits. At the end of the day, we have slightly above average corporate income tax rates. Okay, if you compare us to Europe, all the developed countries in Asia, we tax our corporations a little bit more than the average. So anyway, again, if we reduce corporate income taxes, there are a couple of reasons. You know, rich people would have higher personal incomes; they might pay more in personal income taxes, and then maybe some money that gets kind of stored in offshore corporations and subsidiaries comes home, and when that comes home, we think that'll create jobs, right? So that's the argument for reducing corporate income taxes. I think we've already covered the first 5. I'm going to skip over the sales tax and jump right to the last option, and that would be, what if we just use the money to pay down the debt? And I never thought much about this, but in light of some of these recent studies, I'm starting to think maybe this isn't such a bad thing at all. This is also politically hard to sell because this really is just a tax increase, and we know how unpopular that would be in the present Congress. But let's think about it this way. I mean, what is the burden of having a high federal debt? These are projections from not at all a right-wing kind of think tank, the Brookings Institute, showing that at current kind of projections, we're going to see our kind of federal budget debt and deficits increasing for a good number of years. Why is that a problem? Well, you know, this is our federal budget pie, almost $4 trillion now. About 65%, almost 2/3 of it is what we would call mandatory spending, what some politicians might call entitlements. 90% of that is Social Security and Medicaid. The stuff that we fight over is this discretionary spending, which is 29%, and that yellow slice is the interest on the debt that we have, right? So the fact that we are in deficit and we're increasing our debt in that deficit mode is costly. This is the stuff we fight over. You know, military is more than half of that, and all the rest of it is kind of spread among those other uses of money. This is the mandatory spending part of the pie. You can see about 90% is Social Security, unemployment, Medicare, and health. So I was lucky enough to have a face-to-face meeting while lobbying Representative Paul Ryan 2 years ago. And you know he's, you know, very, very concerned about this big red slice and this blue slice. And I never realized until I actually looked at it in preparation for that meeting that this is a pretty big piece of our federal pie. Just saying, in the spirit of trying to find common ground and agreement with people that we don't normally agree with, this is a pretty big piece of our federal pie. Going back to the interest on the federal debt, we could kind of, if we reduce that, we could reduce the interest on the federal debt. We could use carbon tax revenues to pay it down. What I wanted to kind of impress upon you is if we use the carbon tax revenues to pay down the debt, we would be servicing, we would be trying to reduce that yellow slice. And just to kind of appreciate how much that is, that's $234 billion a year, the interest on our federal debt. Now, I read Paul Krugman's column regularly. I'm not kind of hysterical about kind of, you know, that portion of our economy, but it does have distributional impacts, right? This is the stuff we fight about again. This is what we spend about $2 trillion, excuse me, probably about $800 billion with. If you were going to take the amount of the interest on the federal debt and superimpose that on this, what we would get is a slice of the pie that's about that big, right? So about a third of military spending, we pay more on interest on the debt than we do on energy and the environment, science, transportation, international affairs, social security, employment, and medicine and health put together. We could actually save a lot of people. We could spend a lot of money, put money to a lot of good uses if we were able to reduce our debt and lower our interest payments. So anyway, food for thought. And by the way, what are the distribution implications? When we pay interest on our debt, this is what we pay it to. We're paying it to international investors, and the largest creditor we have is China. Yeah, I'm ethnically Chinese, but that still doesn't give me a warm and fuzzy feeling. Payments to the Chinese government. And then there are a bunch of other creditors, but by and large, when we pay interest on debt, we are paying them to rich people. All right, so reducing the debt has some implications. This is a part, oh, one more thing. What does that look like economically? If you had to find an analog of the four options that I picked before, this is most like reducing capital gains taxes for reasons that I don't completely understand, and so won't kind of get into now anyway. So anyway, this is what I wanted to do last, though, get into the distributional implications. This is why I wanted to rely on the resources for the futures studies instead of the REMI studies, because REMI doesn't do this quite as much. They do a regional kind of breakdown of the incidence of the carbon tax, but they don't do it on a state-by-state level, and I think that tells us a lot. First of all, this is just a map of the welfare chain, the direct energy costs of a carbon tax or carbon fee, and the more brown it is, the worse off it is for these states. You can see the energy-intensive states are Alabama, Mississippi, Arkansas, Missouri, Montana, Michigan, West Virginia, and the brighter yellow it is, the less energy intensive it is. So California and New York stand out. The District of Columbia stands out. Those are the energy unintensive, not very energy intensive states. Illinois is also doing pretty well. But what do you do with carbon tax revenues? Well, one thing they look at was looking at reducing capital gains taxes. And look at that. My home state of Florida and in Wyoming almost would come out net ahead in